Within chapter 7 of my book, I dedicate the whole chapter to psychedelics. It teaches you a little bit about the history of the various psychedelics that exist, how psychedelics are being used in the modern world today. We are able to help people experience that, to visit that mystical, that spiritual world for some length of time. By having a guide and having someone that experienced and helping people get there often helps you stay in that period or stay in that place for longer periods of time. If you are a techno-optimist, you're generally someone who believes that technology is going to save the day for us in one way or another. Whether that's spiritually helping us evolve or that's helping us become an interplanetary species. All of that comes together in my book. One of the other interesting points that I talk about in my book is the lack of spirituality in our society and the spirituality changing in society. There's an increased need to be a spiritual person necessitates having a spiritual experience that is significant for you. Hi everyone, my name is Milan Kordestani and I'm excited to share that I have a new book coming out called Moonshot Moments. If you're interested in these philosophical questions about where the future of humanity is going, what's going to be most influential, what we can actually do, what we can be optimistic about in this world when there's a lot of concern and fear about change happening in our society, this book helps address a lot of those. I call this book a niche book for the techno-optimist of the world because if you are a techno-optimist, you're generally someone who believes that technology is going to save the day for us in one way or another, whether that's from preventing climate change, whether that's helping aid human evolution, whether that's spiritually helping us evolve, or that's helping us become an interplanetary species. One of the other interesting points that I talk about in my book is the lack of spirituality in our society and the spirituality changing in society. Especially in the Western world, there's a lot of increase in secularism. And what I talk about is this evolution of spirituality that I've been witnessing and that a lot of others have been noticing as well, and many have been writing about, which is there's an increased need to be a spiritual person necessitates having a spiritual experience that is significant for you. A lot of times when people don't have that spiritually significant moment in their life that they can point to and they can remember and think, that was the moment where I believed in the natural world or I believed in something greater than myself, what they do is they place that trust in someone else's hands, and that is a relationship that usually becomes quite predatory. And so what I advocate for, and what many others are advocating for within the community of the psychedelic community, is that we are able to help people experience that, to visit that mystical, that spiritual world for some length of time by having a guide and having someone that is experienced and helping people get there, oftentimes by consuming some form of a psychedelic. And the form of psychedelic you consume often helps you stay in that period or stay in that place for longer periods of time. That's what the main difference, I would say, is between all of these different psychedelics, is the length of time you get to visit that spiritual world and what the effects are and how visual it is versus how much you feel it internally in your body. And there's a myriad of other factors, of course, as well. But I talk about that in great depth in this book. I have an entire chapter dedicated to psychedelics because I want people to know that not only is this an emerging treatment for a lot of the trauma that people have in society and that people are facing on an individual level and don't know how to address, people who don't feel like therapy is as impactful for them, or they don't even think it's worth the first step because they don't feel like they themselves are ready to open up. I talk about how really to address these larger macro problems as a society, we have to first address the micro problems that individuals are facing. And one of the best ways to help people address their traumas is through psychedelic-assisted therapy. And with that comes also not just people addressing their traumas, but people addressing the need that they have for some form of new spirituality in their life. And I'm not here to sell you on a specific type of spirituality, but I am here to tell you that you can integrate and learn more about your own spirituality from a first-person perspective by entering that spiritual world in some form or another by trying and consuming psychedelics. Whether knowledge and experience is positive or traumatic, psychedelics give us the opportunity to think about the world and those experiences in new ways. From letting go of the self to connecting with a greater joyous cosmology to accepting death, the experience of psychedelics is a vast range we have only begun to document and study. Within chapter 7 of my book, I dedicate the whole chapter to psychedelics, and The conversation throughout that book teaches you a little bit about the history of the various psychedelics that exist, but it also exists to teach you about how psychedelics are being used in the modern world today. And there's a big change in how we use psychedelics today versus how they were used in, say, the 60s or 70s or 80s and even before then to now, which is to say that in the past, we used them more for spiritual experiences, and we didn't know how to guide those experiences, how to ensure that someone had high likelihood of a good experience, a good trip, a good journey. And today, we do know how to control the psychedelic experience, the journey, the trip, a little more safely to ensure that there are successful outcomes for people, that no one's having a bad journey. We found a way today in the clinical setting through research to figure out who's a good candidate for these types of treatments and how to use psychedelics in ways that are really positive for people, that end up either creating a spiritual experience for them or help them to address certain traumas that they're facing. Specifically, veterans with significant amounts of PTSD are kind of at the ground floor of this. They are getting their brains scanned, and we're able to see the long-term impact on their brains being quite positive, actually, and the long-term impact to their social lives being really positive after having one major psychedelic experience. I talk about that in great depth in this book because I want people to know that these alternative treatments are coming up and that they require public support because they're very novel ways of treating mental illness, or they're very novel ways of incurring a spiritual experience that's significant for people. And they require support because they're not normal things that can just be legalized. You can't just prescribe a psychedelic to someone and they go into their own home and they take this and it goes right. It requires to be in a setting where it's almost, not only are you able to let go and just go deep into your own thoughts and your own brain and see what comes up, but it requires a guide almost to help you get to that point, to prepare you for it. And so I talk about this novel form of treatment that's happening because it is happening in large part in the underground. It's people who know someone, or they know a shaman, they know a therapist who's able to help guide these experiences. And that's very underground. We need to bring this above ground from just being accessible for wealthy people or people who are connected to those who are really suffering and don't know that these alternative treatments do exist for them. So yeah, that's what I do in my chapter on psychedelics. I talk about the whole range of modalities. I talk about LSD, I talk about ayahuasca, ibogaine, MDMA, ketamine, 5-MeO-DMT. There's a whole range of these different psychedelics that are being researched for different people, for different reasons, for different ways of helping you reach that psychedelic or that spiritual world where you're able to really be calm and unpack certain memories in your brain. And yeah, kind of create new memories and associations with those memories and reach a place of peace. It sounds very fantastical. It sounds kind of very woo-woo. But if you're someone that's ever questioned if any religions that are focused on reaching a state of enlightenment, a state of peace, a state of infinite self-love, if you believe that that's possible for you and you just don't know how you're going to get there, then probably a psychedelic journey should be on your roadmap, something that you encounter in your lifetime. And I hope that you're able to find a clinic or an individual who's able to guide you through that. And so I just want to teach people about that in chapter 7. If we enable psychedelics to become, and treatment of mental health through psychedelic-assisted therapy to be more common in our society, that then we will get to address a lot of the greater challenges that our society is facing. On the topic of challenges our society is facing, within this book, I bring in a lot of different statistics and a lot of different information from various historians to talk about how right now in our world, there is a large increase in authoritarian governments. That is, governments that if they don't like what you're saying or they don't like the types of freedoms that you're expressing, are trying to use their power to suppress you and to take freedoms away from you. There's several different surveys I talk about in the book that mention how there is a decrease actually in democracy that has been happening since the 1980s, which we reached a peak actually in the 80s of certain freedoms across the world, and that today we're seeing a large decrease in those democracies. That's a major problem for the human evolution, because as we start to see less input from populations in their governments, we're going to see that those populations are not going to be represented when large problems come up. One of the major problems I foresee is that there's going to be this growing divide between those who are wealthy and have access to treatments to be able to treat mental health disorders, who have access to genetic engineering and bioengineering to be able to live longer, just truly have access to be able to protect themselves and insulate themselves from the rest of the world. There's going to be a greater divide that happens socially between those individuals and the rest of the world. And as that divide happens, it's going to become quite nightmarish for humanity. And so the alternative to this, what a lot of these writers that I advocate for in my book, the alternative is actually hyper-cooperation, that we start to have these conversations about some of the controversial topics, whether it's job loss caused by AI, or whether it's genetic engineering of fetuses, or whether it's the integration of technology into our human bodies, or it's space travel to other planets. These conversations might seem like they're really outlandish and far out there, but they actually are what bring us together. When we talk about what the possibilities are for us as a species, and we articulate them, then we're able to start regulating, then we're able to start talking about what the doomsday scenarios are and how we prevent them from happening, how we stop and prevent division from happening. And that's honestly when funding opens up a lot, which is one of the big things I mention in my book, is that to cultivate Moonshot Moments, there are a list of certain factors that enable them to happen, and one of those big factors is funding. Let me read off a list of some of those things. I'm going to talk about what Mustafa Suleyman in his book, The Coming Wave, describes as some of the most important factors that create these coming waves, what I call moonshot moments, but these waves of great technological progress. The first is that they have a hugely asymmetrical impact. One person in a lab or a group of AI programmers can accidentally or intentionally unleash a technology that can affect people across international borders and possibly endanger the entire species. A second is that they are developing in a kind of hyper-evolution. So not only is our technology evolving, but the technology to make that technology is also evolving. For example, 3D printers, improvements in microchips, and new DNA splicing technology all make it easier to build new tools that can then make gains further and faster. They are increasingly autonomous. So this is especially true with viruses that can self-replicate, nanotechnology that could self-replicate, and AI that can teach other AI to be better. The fourth is that they are general and omni-use. So AI is a technology that can be used to make a wide variety of tools, isn't designed for one specific function, but rather has a huge range. Other examples might be electricity or team power. These are general technologies that are subsequently used to produce more specific technologies. This means that they can be hard to control because people can always argue that there are many more beneficial uses. The proliferation of AI can either create great wealth and great surplus of time and money and resources for humanity, or it can do the opposite, and it can totally tear apart our society and leave people aimless, jobless, lacking some forms of spirituality, lacking forms of income. The reality is, at this point in time, it's kind of in our hands as humanity on which way we try to guide AI.